The families of the 4 University of Idaho students who were murdered in a horrific November 2022 attack have filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Washington State University, claiming that the school where Bryan Kohberger was both a PhD student and teaching assistant knew about his disturbing behavior and didn't do enough to address it. The explosive lawsuit, which comes 6 months after Kohberger was sentenced to life for the murders of Madison Mogen, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, further claims that their deaths were preventable if WSU properly responded to his, quote, inappropriate, predatory, and menacing behavior. The lawsuit alleges that almost immediately after Kohberger arrived on campus, he began displaying a pattern of concerning behavior. The suit claims one grad student described him as a stalker, and another characterized him as a, quote, possible future rapist. According to the lawsuit, at least 13 complaints were lodged against Kohberger in the university's Compliance and Civil Rights Office, but the person in charge of dealing with those complaints never even reached out to him. The legal team for the families said in a statement that, quote, this effort is not about vengeance or speculation. This is about ensuring that institutions entrusted with the safety of young people take threats seriously and act decisively when warning signs are present. Criminal defense attorney John W. Day joins Forbes True Crime to break down all the lawsuit's shocking allegations. Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, one of the hosts of Forbes True Crime. Joining me now is criminal defense attorney John W. Day. John, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Brittany.
The families of the 4 University of Idaho students who were brutally murdered by Bryan Kohberger in November of 2022 all teamed up to file a wrongful death lawsuit against Washington State University. And this is the school where Kohberger was both a teaching assistant as well as PhD student. And the 126-page lawsuit just contains bombshell after bombshell. The suit alleges that despite the university receiving over a dozen formal complaints about his predatory behavior, quote, WSU failed to respond in any meaningful way and allowed Kohberger's escalating behavior to continue unchecked. It also alleges that the deaths of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Ethan Chapin, and Xana Kernodle wouldn't have happened if WSU acted appropriately. And there is certainly a lot in here, which we'll all get into. But to start off the conversation, what's your initial reaction to the lawsuit?
Well, we know that the families of the victims want to hold somebody accountable. And in the criminal case against Kohberger, there was no trial. Remember, he took a plea. So there's some argument that the families lost out on at least having their day in court, with Kohberger having to face the music in terms of going on trial. What happens here is the families are using the civil system, the civil judicial system, to go after almost a bigger institutional target, the university, saying that the university had so much notice that Kohberger was dangerous, that Kohberger should be watched, that Kohberger should have been kept under a tight rein, and they didn't do it. So the families are saying to the university, you had plenty of notice about this guy and you did nothing. And so now we're trying to hold you accountable. So what they may have lost out in a criminal trial, they're trying to gain in the civil courts. And you can understand the families of the victims wanting justice on that level.
To that point, I mean, what happened was just heartbreaking. And reading all 126 pages of this lawsuit, I mean, the details here of if these allegations are true of what WSU knew and when, I mean, it's just mind-boggling, especially because Kohberger worked in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology. I mean, these people are criminologists. They, according to this suit, recognized this behavior and didn't really do much. And I want to talk about what stood out to me in this, what the allegations are, because it alleges that Kohberger was discussed in multiple faculty meetings, and one professor said this, quote, mark my words, I work with predators. If we give him a PhD, that's the guy that in that many years, when he is a professor, we will hear is harassing, stalking, and sexually abusing his students. Then, as early as September 2022, professors were talking about needing to stage an intervention with Kohberger, and around that time, one professor at least thought he was stalking people. That's obviously at the beginning of the semester. I mean, that happened pretty much almost immediately after he came onto campus. Kohberger's supervising instructor knew that women had uncomfortable interactions with Kohberger, and some female grad students felt unsafe around him. That's what the lawsuit alleges. Also, it talked about these tactics employees would use, including a bunch of them would stay in one room if Kohberger was one-on-one with a female colleague so that that woman wouldn't be alone with him. One employee set up this system where she told another employee, hey, email me 911 as the subject line of an email if Kohberger's making you feel weird. There were also complaints that he exhibited stalking behavior, and some female students and staff members were so creeped out by him that an escort system was put into place after 5 p.m. In some cases, professors and members of the WSU Police Department were the ones providing these escorts. So it really sounds like, according to this lawsuit, these weren't just one or two isolated incidents. Students and employees were creeped out by him, and employees and people who were above Kohberger knew about this behavior. I mean, what are your thoughts on the details here?
Yeah, Brittany, it's stunning. The allegations, if they're true, they paint a picture of a university that was fully on notice that Kohberger was a problem, and that's an understatement. And again, this isn't happening in a vacuum. This is the criminal justice department. These are professional academic people who have backgrounds in criminal justice. And the red flags are going up all over the place, according to the lawsuit. Plenty of people knew that there was a problem here. And the families of the victims are saying to WSU, why didn't you do anything? You had plenty of notice. You had an obligation to protect our children, our family members, and you had plenty of red flags you could have used to intervene, and you didn't do anything. And so they're seeking justice, they're seeking compensation from the university for their inactivity. And the facts are just, they're spectacularly damning for WSU, because it shows that there wasn't just an isolated incident. There were plenty of people who were saying, this guy's a problem.
And it almost seemed like there was a culture of women trying to protect other women employees there. But he was put on this improvement plan, and this was at the beginning of November, less than 2 weeks before the murders. There was a vague 4-point improvement plan that was focused on goal setting, talking to the supervisor about if you're meeting those goals, and then the goals can get harder and harder each week. There was a picture of that improvement plan in the lawsuit. Do you think that was sufficient?
Well, the idea that they were taking some kind of action, but in retrospect, obviously, it's mind-boggling that that's all that the university was doing. They knew that they had to do something, and this was their effort at an intervention. But you just have to wonder, according to the allegations in the lawsuit, if they're true, who came up with the idea and who was saying, let's not move, let's not be hasty, let's not move quickly. You also get the sense that the university was afraid that somehow Kohberger was going to sue the university. And that's a spectacularly stunning fact in here, the idea that WSU, that these people who were in the administrative ranks, people who had experience with criminal justice, the upper level of WSU was not doing anything more. And so, the families, the case is pretty strong that the families have put together. And again, these are just the allegations in the initial lawsuit and the complaint. But the fact is, they've done their digging, they've done their investigation, and they've learned that there was plenty of opportunity for WSU to step in, plenty of chances for the university to say to Kohberger, we're watching you, and would that have made a difference? And that's what's heartbreaking about that.
I think you mentioned this. One of the most shocking allegations in this lawsuit was Kohberger's supervising instructor, according to this lawsuit, apparently was concerned that Kohberger, if they released him, he would sue the university. I mean, what do you make of that? As an attorney, does that seem like this supervising instructor was putting trying to save the WSU, trying to save the university above addressing these really valid concerns?
That's the question, isn't it, Brittany? Was the university, were the administrators more concerned about if they take some kind of intervening action against Kohberger, well, what's he going to do? Is he going to sue us? And are we afraid of a lawsuit? And you can tell that somebody was doing this balancing test about what do we know about Kohberger, who has raised concerns about him, who's raised safety issues on the one hand, and on the other hand, he might sue us. And so I think with this lawsuit, the victims' families are going to be able to dig deep into the university structure. You can imagine this being a bureaucratic university administration where people are talking about, we got to cover our behinds, we don't want to be sued. And of course, in retrospect, that's just heartbreakingly incompetent. So the families have a lot of digging to do as their lawsuit proceeds. What's going to happen is they're going to have access to a lot of records, a lot of depositions, a lot of statements by witnesses. And they're going to really try to get to the bottom of who was making the decision at the university that protecting ourselves against the lawsuit from Kohberger was more important than intervening with him and protecting potential future victims.
And I mean, the allegations in here are just chilling. It's not like one person called him a workplace creep. Someone said that he was, and I'm quoting them, a possible future rapist. Another said she would leave her door open just to make sure and monitor that he wouldn't do anything inappropriate if he was with a student alone. She thought he was a sexual assaulter type. The university received at least 13 formal complaints, and the lawsuit says that the person who's in charge of handling these complaints, they never even reached out to Kohberger in person or virtually at all to have any type of conversation with him. The lawsuit also says that multiple students weren't satisfied with the way that the university was handling Kohberger. What do you make of that?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see as this lawsuit progresses. Did anything change at the university after Kohberger was arrested, after the murders? Did anything at the university, did anyone say, look, we have a system that's failed. We have a system that doesn't work when people are reporting things about potential problems with our students or staff or whoever it is. That's what's going to come out in this lawsuit is, did the university do anything differently after this? Because according to the allegations, and again, the victims' families have to prove these in court, but clearly they've done a lot of digging. They've got some basis for these claims. And so you're just struck with the incompetence. You're just struck with the bureaucratic inactivity, people being more concerned about being sued than protecting. And again, the university has an obligation to protect its students. It's not just, a hope that somehow the students will be okay. The university has an affirmative obligation to protect its students. And when you have this many complaints, it'd be one thing if there were one or two complaints about Kohberger. I suppose administrators might brush those off saying these are just, some kind of interpersonal situation. But when you have that level of complaints that the university had, according to the lawsuit, it's just staggering. And you just have to wonder who was making the decision as these complaints came in, who was making the decision to basically ignore them. And that's what's going to come out in this lawsuit.
The lawsuit alleges that the only reason Bryan Kohberger was even in this part of the country in the first place was because of WSU. And if the university conducted a more thorough background check on him, he would never be here. He would be back in Pennsylvania because WSU is right next to Moscow. It's in the same community. It's only separated by a few miles. And if there was a proper background check, it would have found some red flags that would not have made him eligible to go to the university. And I want to talk about that past behavior that's brought up in this lawsuit. One, it talks about the heroin addiction that Bryan struggled with in his teen years. It also mentions this prior arrest for theft. It also talks about him allegedly getting kicked out of a vocational school after multiple female classmates complained about him. It also talks about this slew of really disturbing posts Bryan Kohberger apparently made online, talks about him and this inability to feel emotion. Allegedly, he posted about dealing with crazy thoughts and that he could, quote, do whatever I want with little remorse. The lawsuit also alleges that female employees at a local brewery complained about Kohberger. They said that he made them feel so uncomfortable, they put an alert in their system that whenever they swiped his ID, it would alert other employees to let them know that his behavior was concerning. So how much does this past behavior matter?
Well, it matters to the extent that the families are claiming the university, as you said, did not do its due diligence. They did not find information about Kohberger before he came to the university. And even after the fact, once he's there, you would think that if any of this information was available to the university, that they would have put two and two together. But especially once they start getting these contemporaneous complaints, once they start getting multiple complaints about him, the question is going to be, why didn't they take stronger measures? The idea that there's some kind of 4-point improvement plan for someone who's racked up that many serious complaints. And these are not just trivial complaints about him. These are people saying, I'm scared, and not just ordinary regular folks. These are people who are specialists in criminal justice. And so the university is in a really bad position to try to defend this based on the allegations in the family's lawsuit.
And that improvement plan, from what I saw in the lawsuit, it did look like it was more of a PIP that someone would have if they, weren't that great at their job, not if they were being accused of stalking people in the workplace. But the lawsuit also mentions issues that the WSU Police Department was facing at the time. I want to quote it. WSU Police Department had a long, troubling, and sordid history of tolerating and, in fact, fostering inappropriate sexual behavior in its own ranks and discouraging complete and accurate reporting of occurrences of such misconduct. The lawsuit mentions the resignation of multiple members of the police department over an investigation into sexual misconduct allegations. Do you think that that adequately shows that the university here has a systemic problem when it comes to handling these types of allegations?
Well, the plaintiffs in this case, the victims' families certainly hope so. That's their claim. And their claim is going to be, look, the reason that the university was so inept and so incompetent at dealing with Kohberger is this systemic or this institutional problem that we've identified involving the police department as well as just the administrators who apparently were willing to ignore the complaints about Kohberger. So there's a lot in the lawsuit that the victims' families are going to get to dig into. There's a lot to unpack here, but they've put together a really strong argument that this university failed miserably in protecting those four young people who were murdered, and that they had plenty of notice that they needed to do something. And so a good question is going to be, has the university changed anything since the Kohberger murders? Have they remained the same? And that's the kind of thing that this lawsuit will get into.
And to that point, it doesn't seem like, based on this lawsuit, that this was a he said, she said. It seemed like everyone in this department, or almost everyone who interacted with Bryan Kohberger on this university campus, felt some sort of way about him, and that way wasn't good. You've handled wrongful death lawsuits before. How strong of a case do you think these families have?
From what I've seen in the complaint and what we've heard surrounding it, it's an incredibly strong case, and it's just going to get even stronger as it proceeds onward in what we call discovery. When they get information from the other side, they get to sit down, have people sit down for sworn depositions. You know that the family's lawyers are going to dig into every corner of this, try to figure out where everything fell apart, why the university wasn't, according to them, engaged in protecting these children rather than protecting Kohberger. And so it's just, I mean, it's really heartbreaking to see these claims and realize that, according to the victims' families, the university had so many opportunities to step in, so many chances to get on top of Kohberger in the sense of, we're watching you, you're a problem, you've had so many complaints. And the fact that they didn't is going to be a key element of the lawsuit. But they've got so much information here, and it's really damning for WSU. Really, really tough for that university to come back from this.
And WSU eventually did terminate Kohberger's employment in December. Obviously, that was too late. It was a month after those murders. What do you think WSU's best defense is here? Do you think that they could say, hey, we did eventually fire him? Or do you think that's more in favor of the plaintiff? What does their defense look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, the defense is going to have to be somewhere this fell apart, and we've got to figure out where it was. And, the standard defense is, well, we did everything we could, and no one could have predicted that Kohberger would do this. But that's the problem, is the plaintiffs, the victims' families are saying, yes, you could have predicted this. Because, first of all, a lot of this information was coming from a lot of the complaints were coming from the criminal justice people, the criminal justice department. This was not just people who had no connection or no experience with the court system and with law enforcement. These were people who knew what they were talking about. And even apart from that, just the regular complaints about him should have been more than enough to generate some type of response. So it's a tough case for the university to defend, to say, well, we were incompetent and inept for these reasons. That doesn't fly in front of a jury.
And I want to read a statement from the family's lawyers. This is what they said. The victims' families have come together with a shared purpose to seek transparency, accountability, and meaningful reform. They also added this. This effort is not about vengeance or speculation. This is about ensuring that institutions entrusted with the safety of young people take threats seriously and act decisively when warning signs are present. What precedent do you think this lawsuit is going to set?
Well, again, it's the family's effort, and that's what they're saying is obviously what they believe, which is that they want to make sure that this doesn't happen to anybody else's family again. They're also seeking monetary damages, which is how our judicial system handles, situations like this. How do you compensate for the loss of these four really lovely, sweet young people at the hands of a brutal, killer? So the family's saying, on the one hand, university, you need to compensate us for what you did, what you didn't do, but we also want to ensure that there's attention paid to how incompetent or how failed the university's response was. So they're trying to seek justice. Again, they had the Kohberger criminal case, didn't go to trial. He did plead guilty locked up for the rest of his life. But there may be some in those victims' families who say, we can't just stop with Kohberger. There was a systemic fault here at the university that let this happen, and we want to make sure that never happens again.
This story was just, absolutely tragic for college kids. Also especially tragic when you read the allegations in here, and if this is true of what WSU knew, it's just horrifying. And I know that you said that the families are seeking unspecified monetary damages. No amount of money obviously is going to bring back their family members. That's just horrible. But what do you think that could look like?
It's sort of, I don't know is the short answer, but what they want is this to hurt enough to the university that the university pays attention to it. They want to say, look, you've got to pay one way or the other, whether it's you change your policies, you fire the people who should be fired, you find out who was responsible for making these horrible decisions on the one hand, and on the other, our judicial system compensates people. This is really the only way they do it is with money. But if it's a large enough amount that it makes people sit up and pay attention to the university's actions or inactions, that's where the victims' families are going. I certainly believe them when they say, this is not about the money because nothing will bring back our loved ones, but we've got to make you, university, pay attention to how you behaved or how you failed to act to protect our people. So the money, the figure is really something to say, look, take notice, pay attention. You've got to pay out a huge multi-million-dollar sum because you failed, and we want you to understand that we're taking this seriously, and you as a university ought to be taking this seriously.
The four families are united here in this suit, and from what you're saying, it sounds like they have a really strong case against WSU. So what next? What's the next thing you're looking for? Do you think that WSU is going to settle?
Well, most civil cases do settle. In this particular case, I think the families need and want to get as much information as possible through the litigation system, through discovery, and they want to back up their allegations. They probably have a lot of information already. What's going to be interesting is what internally the university has to turn over. What are we going to learn about how the university decided to put Kohberger, for example, on an improvement plan? An improvement plan is what you do with an employee who maybe is late to work or is not performing properly. It's kind of mind-boggling to think that the university thought that putting this guy who had so many complaints about him on a so-called improvement plan was somehow going to be effective. But at the end of the day, the families are going to get through the discovery process, through litigation. They're going to get a lot of information, and my guess is a lot of it is going to be very, very embarrassing for the university in terms of how they failed to act.
Really stunning stuff in this lawsuit. John W. Day, I appreciate you coming on and breaking it down with us. Thank you so much for lending your expertise. I hope you can join me again.
Thanks for having me, Brittany.